Hey guys, this story got sent to me by a friend of the guy we're going to talk about. The story is a wild one, so let's jump in. Story about a Hungarian man named Albert and a bar girl called Nak, that's spelled N-A-A-K. I would describe Albert as a highly intelligent, quick-witted guy who does not suffer fools gladly. A bit of an introvert, but very engaging when you get to know him. He had been living in the UK for over 10 years when I first met him. He speaks perfect English. I would not say he is particularly handsome, but certainly not so bad looking. His only chance at female company would be via a financial transaction, if you know what I mean. Like many men who head to Thailand, he had previously been in a bad relationship with Western women. This is not a story about a naive guy who goes to Pattaya and is conned by a bar girl. I am well aware that this does happen every day. The majority of this story took place between 2016 and 2020. I first met Albert when we both worked as chefs at a well-known restaurant in central London in 2013. During this time, we became fairly good friends. We both left the restaurant after a couple of years. I moved to Spain, and he got a job working as a private chef for a Russian family. In London, this detail will become important later. We keep in touch, and whenever I was back in London, we would often meet up for a drink and catch up. I remember one time we met up. He had just come back from his first trip to Thailand. He had visited Phuket and straight away had been bitten by the Thailand bug. He returned full of stories about his first experience with Thai women, the beaches, islands, food, and was encouraging me to go there at the first chance I got. It seemed as though this experience had changed his life. Albert started visiting Thailand whenever he could, every 3 or 4 months when he could get time off work. He would go for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, mainly to Pattaya and sometimes to Bangkok. During these holidays, he would usually see more than one girl, but he didn't like to change too much on around the 4th visit. He met Nak in a bar towards the top of Soi 6. The first night they met, he took her out of the bar, and they spent the night drinking on Walking Street. He then took her out every day for the rest of his 3-week holiday. They both went up to Bangkok, took a boat tour along the river, stayed in nice hotels, ate at nice restaurants, and generally enjoyed each other's company. Nak was not the typical bar girl from a village. Previously, she had been married to a foreigner and lived in Bangkok for many years, working in an office. Unfortunately, the marriage had been an unhappy one, and after divorcing, she moved to Pattaya and started working in the bars. She started working the bars relatively late, as she was in her early 30s. But by the time these two met, she was already a seasoned pro and was making a lot of money working in the bar. Her English is pretty good, and she has a great sense of humor. I would say that she is a bit more aware of the outside world than most Thai bar girls you tend to meet. By the end of the holiday, Albert had really fallen for Nak. He had to return to the UK for work but made his feelings clear to her. On returning to the UK, they spoke every night after he finished work, often for hours at a time. They were already making plans of how they would be together long term. Worth pointing out at this stage, Albert was certainly aware that she had to make money every day and would still be going out with customers from her bar. After a few more months, Albert returned to Thailand to spend another holiday with Nak. He told me that this time, he made an arrangement with the bar she worked in, that he could pay one large bar fine. I believe it was in the region of 12,000 baht, so that any time he came back to her to the bar, she was allowed to leave with him for an unlimited number of times. Like most men who fall in love, Albert didn't want Nak to keep seeing other customers, but he couldn't really afford to cover her living expenses. He was saving up for a deposit to buy a house in the UK. So they came to an agreement. He would send her 15,000 baht a month, and that she would not spend the night with any customers. This was a good compromise, as she would still earn a good salary and they could talk on the phone each night. So their relationship continued like this for about another year, with him visiting Thailand when he had a chance, usually every few months. All the time Albert was thinking of how they could be together. He knew that there are not many work opportunities for foreigners in Thailand, and bringing her to the UK would be very difficult. After about a year, things changed. Albert had a big disagreement with his Russian employer and left the job, and unfortunately without a reference. He spent the next 6 months trying to find another private chef's job in London, but with no success. He did have a few temporary jobs, but none of them worked out. It seemed he was a bit fed up with his line of work and wanted a change. During this period, I met him once. He was feeling pretty dejected and disheartened. He'd used up a lot of his savings as it's so expensive to live in central London. He informed me that he was going to Pattaya for a month to see his girlfriend, and that after he would come back and find another job. He booked a one-way ticket, but had the intention of buying the return ticket later on. At about the same time, I was offered a couple of months' work cooking for a politician in Indonesia. I had always wanted to visit Southeast Asia since I was a kid, so after completing the work in Indonesia, I decided to head to Vietnam and travel around for about a month. I also arranged to meet Albert in Pattaya. He had ended up staying there for over 2 months at that point. During this time, he had been paying a small amount of money each day to compensate her for not working. I'm not sure the exact amount, but I believe it was less than 1,000 baht per day. I flew from Saigon to Bangkok, took a taxi down to Pattaya, and stayed at a hotel on the 3rd road. We met up the first evening on Soi 6. Now I must say, I'd like to think of myself as a pretty streetwise guy, but nothing could have prepared me for my first encounter with Soi 6. I can laugh now looking back, but at the time I was completely shell-shocked. What a place. Anyway, over the next week, he and his girlfriend showed me around Pattaya and explained how the system in the bars worked. We had a wonderful time, lots of laughs, and I had my first experience with Thai women. Albert told me that he was having a great time in Pattaya with Nak and was feeling relaxed. He did say he was going to have to go back to the UK and make some money soon, but that he couldn't quite face doing that just yet. Upon leaving, I invited him to join me in Vietnam. For some of the trip, a couple of weeks later he contacted me, and we all met up in Hanoi. We did the usual sightseeing in Hanoi Hilton, the prisoner of war jail, Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum, then took some trips to Ha Long Bay and up to Sapa. For the most part, we had a really great time, except Nak had never been outside of Thailand and spent a lot of time complaining about the food. During this trip, he confided in me and told me that his money was running low and he really needed to find a job soon, but he could use his credit card for a while if he needs be. After this trip, I took a job cooking for a family in the Swiss Alps. I felt absolutely miserable leaving Southeast Asia. I sat on the plane for 14 hours and stopped in Moscow for a few hours, and then arrived in Switzerland, where it was -10. Some mornings I spent the next few months being pretty miserable, working there, dreaming of returning to Asia the first chance I got. My luck came when the family I'd cooked for in Indonesia offered me to come and work for them on their yacht full-time. I immediately said yes, packed up my things, and headed back to the warmth of Southeast Asia. I had a few weeks spare before starting back in Indonesia, so I decided I would have a little holiday in Thailand first. Albert had been there all this time, and I was wondering how could he be surviving this long. It was a fantastic feeling arriving in Bangkok again. I spent a couple of days in Bangkok before heading down to Pattaya. However, this time things were quite different with my friend. He congratulated me on my new job, but I could see he was really depressed. The stress of his situation was really getting to him. By this time, it was too late for him to go back to the UK as he only had a couple of £1,000s left, which wasn't enough for him to pay the flight to the UK, pay for the deposit on an apartment and first month's rent in central London, plus survive until he got paid. After his first month's work, he had no family or friends willing to support him either. He also had a huge debt that he owed in the UK. He explained to me that when he worked for the Russian family, he used to do all the food and alcohol shopping each month. He would pay for it on his credit card, and then the employer would reimburse him. This used to be at least £4,000 each month. So after about a year, Amex wrote to him and informed him they were increasing his credit card limit to $50,000. He also extended his overdraft to £5,000 and took out another credit card with a £3,000 limit. So the past year, he'd been living off these credit cards. He wasn't able to withdraw any cash with them, so he and his girlfriend used to buy gold using the card and then sell the gold when they needed cash. When his girlfriend first stopped working, he had paid her a small salary so she could send money to her mother who looked after her daughter. But now he was not in a position to pay her anything, with the bank and the credit card companies contacting him and demanding their money be repaid. From what I could see, Nak was genuinely in love with Albert because even though he wasn't paying her anything, she continued to stay with him. It was very sad seeing my friend fall on hard times. Albert and Nak had moved out of the condo they had rented and moved into next small room. Unfortunately, at that time, I didn't particularly have a lot of money myself, but I gave Albert a few £100s and said I'd help him out again once I was settled into my new job. Towards the end of my holiday, Albert was acting a bit funny with me. I think perhaps he was a little bit annoyed with himself that I was off to start a new job, and he was still there in Pattaya running out of money. We had a bit of a falling out about a month later. I was meant to pass on his CV for a job, but I had forgotten to pass it on, which annoyed him greatly. After that, I didn't hear from him for about 6 months. But then one day he messaged me and said, "Hey, I know we haven't been so close recently, but I really need your help." I was immediately glad that he reached out to me. I read on. "I have found a permanent job in France. The family wants me to start on Thursday. This was a Monday. I just need some help to get to France. I already had to sell my laptop." I replied that of course I would be more than happy to help him to just send me the flight details that he needed, and I will book it that evening. But he then told me that it would be more convenient if I sent him the money for the ticket, as in his words, "I have a friend with a voucher for discounted flight tickets, which I can use." I immediately thought this was very suspicious. I told him, "Okay, well, send me a picture of the voucher and I will book it for you." After this, he never replied. I can only assume he was lying and there was no job. His number went dead shortly after that, and his Facebook account was deleted. Looking back, I deeply regret not just sending him the money, as he was obviously in desperate need. But at the same time, I didn't like him lying to me. And I've had bad experience with lending money in the past. I wish he had just been honest about the situation. At that time, I was in contact with one bar girl who knew Nak, so I asked her if she knew anything about what had happened to Albert. She told me that Albert was still in Pattaya, living in the girl's room, and that now Nak was working a couple of days a week back at her old bar on Soi 6. She was having to go with customers again to support both of them. This revelation broke my heart, as it must have been terrible for the two of them. I don't know what became of them since. I hope he got himself out of trouble somehow. I'm trying to find out, but I've lost contact with the other bar girl. It does show, though, you can find the occasional diamond in the rough. Not all bar girls will drop you like a stone when the money runs out, although 99.9% probably will. With that being said, I strongly advise anyone against getting emotionally involved with any bar girl.